Hello everyone, I am Nat1995 here in the video game fanfic plot with a small announcement for you all. And no, it's not anything to do with a new update of a chapter or some gameplay. I just wanted to get this out of the way because I've been getting really annoyed with several individuals leaving inappropriate links in the comments section down below. Even though my YouTube channel is not marked for kids, kids can get around those types of things. And I'm getting really annoyed. Those websites, I don't want to go to those. Stop leaving them in the comment section. And you're doing this for shits and giggles. Knock it off. It's not funny. Those websites contain a lot of viruses, malware, and all those types of stuff that could mess around with my computer. And I don't want that. So, whoever you are and you're watching this video right now, I'm on to you. And sooner or later, I will block you from this channel. This is my only and final warning to anyone who's doing this for fun.
Chapter 41. Articles and Reactions. A grinning Salazar sat in his favorite chair in the snake pit later that night, with the golden egg sitting on his lap. Hermione, Neville, Fred, George, Godric, Blaise, Nora, and Emeralda were sitting around him, debating on whether or not he should open it. Hermione said it should be studied closely, but Godric was all for just opening the thing to get it over with. Salazar knew the suspense was getting to the man. But we don't know what kind of spells have been placed on it. Hermione said, motioning to the egg. I mean, what if Harry opens it and something bad happens? This tournament is designed to test your magical skills and knowledge. What if he opens it and we all go deaf, or blind, or something? An excellent point, Salazar said, nodding in her direction. But they aren't going to do that, Godric said, rolling his eyes. Gordy's right, Fred said. And even if we go deaf, pass out, or what have you, it will most likely be temporary. Can you say that with certainty? Hermione asked, raising an eyebrow at him. All I know is, if Speaker opens that silly egg and something bad happens to him, I'm biting someone. Nora said as she glared at it. I agree, Fishbait. You bite them, and I'll squash them. Then Pigeon can peck their eyes out, and the Peacock can drop them into a volcano. Nora said with a nod, as Hedwig hooted and bobbed her head and Nahum ruffled his feathers. Finishing them off for good measure, Nora? Neville asked with a grin. Correct, Bottom. She replied with a firm nod of her head. That stupid winged lizard is lucky I was far enough away from her this morning. I could have done some major damage to her. Emeralda hissed loudly in agreement. Her other eggs looked rather tasty. Salazar chuckled and grinned at his beloved snakes. Well, you all make valid points, but I agree with Hermione. In a case like this, you always study the object closely. We know it's an egg and we know it deals with the tournament, but beyond that, we don't know much about it. Okay, so how do we inspect a magical object? Blaise asked, looking at Salazar curiously. Normally, you would not touch it, because you don't know what could happen if you did. However, since we have already done that, we know it's safe to touch. You would visually scan the object and run a few simple tests on it. This spell is used for a single object only, and it lets us know if it is a dark object. The spell is Tenebrae Revelio, he said, waving his wand in circles around the egg. The egg glowed a bright yellow, and Salazar nodded. Tenebrae Revelio means darkness reveled, Godric said. The yellow lets us know that there is no dark charms on it. If there had been, it would have glowed a blood red. Oh, kind of like the blood protection ward, Blaise said, and Salazar nodded. Right, Salazar said. The charm is designed to get around so-called undetectable dark charms and curses, so it never fails. If you cast that spell upon an object and it glows blood red, it's best to leave it alone, and call someone who knows about dark objects and things. But moving on. Godric, your turn, Salazar said with a grin. Godric chuckled. Next you would cast a revealing charm to see if it holds any secrets, and you would visually inspect the object after you cast the spell. If that turns up nothing, more than likely the object is safe and you can pick it up. More than likely? Blaze asked. Salazar chuckled. It's best to levitate it if you're still unsure. True. Godric laughed. Salazar showed them the Revelio and the Specialist Revelio spells, but neither of them showed anything out of the ordinary. So the egg is just a golden egg that needs to be opened, George said, eyeing it with excitement. It seems that way, Salazar said with a nod, and he twisted the top, which made the sides of the egg pop open. The noise emanating from the egg was so loud and obnoxious, that it made everyone clamp their hands over their ears and start yelling at each other. Hedwig let out a loud, disgruntled hoot and flew down the entrance tunnel. Nora dove off the back of Salazar's chair and slithered under it, while Emeralda bolted down the chamber tunnel as fast as her large body would allow her to. Nahum squawked loudly, ruffled his feathers angrily, and promptly disappeared. Salazar had jumped out of his seat, which sent the egg crashing to the floor, but Neville jumped on top of it and was finally able to lock it shut. What in the name of Merlin, Morgana, and Godric's left butt cheek was that? Fred cried, causing his brother to burst out laughing. Godric, who had been caught off guard for a moment, stared at him stupidly before Salazar also burst out laughing. I have no idea what Godric's left butt cheek has to do with anything, but I dare say that was a bit loud. Salazar chuckled, sticking his fingers in his ears and wiggling them around in an effort to stop the ringing. Was it supposed to do that? Hermione giggled, glancing at Godric who was now grinning. Where is Dumley? Nora cried, slithering out from underneath the chair. I want to bite him. Whose brilliant idea was it to make a screaming egg? What do we do now? Neville asked, setting the egg down very carefully on the study table. Well, Bagman said that the egg holds a clue for the second task, so I do need to figure it out, but I have no idea how to go about doing that, Salazar said, as he gazed at the egg. Gordy? What is it? Blaze asked, looking at Godric curiously as he got up from his chair, and began pacing back in front of the large windows that looked out into the lake. Now that my ears have stopped ringing, and I can somewhat think about it, I've heard that sound before. Unfortunately, I can't place it, but I know I have heard it, Godric said, turning towards Salazar. Heard it from where? Hermione asked, furrowing her brow. Godric shook his head. I don't know. It's like I said, I can't place it. Maybe if I heard it again. He started to say, but he was cut off by a loud no from Hermione, Neville, and Blaze, which caused Fred and George to start laughing again. Jolly, if you open that egg and it starts screaming again. I will bite you. Nora cried, flicking her forked tongue at him in a threatening manner. Fred snorted. I think Nora is actually serious. I am, she replied as she glared at him and Godric. Salazar chuckled. No, I don't think opening it tonight is going to do any good. Besides, it's getting late and we have classes tomorrow, so you all need to head to bed. Good point, Hermione said as she stood. We have a test in Transfiguration first thing, and something tells me Professor McGonagall won't like it if we fall asleep during it. Indeed. Salazar chuckled. We have plenty of time to study the egg because the next task isn't until February 24th. Hopefully I can remember where I've heard that sound before, Godric added. It's going to drive me batty until I do. You're already batty, Salazar said with a grin. Shut up you bald-headed fool. Godric laughed. Anyway, out with all of you, so you don't get caught after curfew. he said, shooing the laughing children towards the entrance tunnel. The Gryffindors left, and the others headed to bed, but it would be a long time before any of them actually fell asleep that night. They were all thinking up ideas that could help them figure out the egg. Is Albus Dumbledore trying to control the boy who lived? By Rita Skeeter. Harry Potter, age 14, is a delightful and polite young man, with handsome looks and a charming smile that could capture the fancy of any young witch. With his well-known act in defeating the dark wizard you-know-who as an infant, it's no wonder the young man is strong, confident, smart, quick-witted, and likable. But is there a darker past to the boyhood hero? Are the stories our children grew up hearing just fables our imaginations have thought up to entertain them? It seems so. A dark shadow lurks over the young man's shoulder, a shadow that seeks to control our Harry. It isn't dark magic, a villainous dark wizard, or an escaped Death Eater. No, the dark controlling shadow that lurks over our hero is none other than Albus Dumbledore, aged 113, headmaster of Hogwarts, chief warlock, grand sorcerer, and supreme mugwump. I was able to sit down with Harry Potter to talk about his life, and it seems that it has not been a fairy tale like we thought. Our evening began with Mr. Potter showing me to the Snake Pit, a room that he and his friend, Gordon Ruffin, aged 13, built out of necessity to escape the attacks of children whose parents are known to have been involved with Death Eater activities. Gordy and I built this place because the headmaster refused to put a stop to the attacks by the children of Death Eaters. It wasn't safe for us to remain in the main Slytherin common room because they would attack us with all manner of borderline dark hexes, jinxes, and curses, but Professor Dumbledore said that they were doing nothing wrong. As a Slytherin, I employed our infamous self-preservation skills, and built the Snake Pit. As I, Rita Skeeter, entered the Snake Pit, a lovely, rich, and lavishly decorated room that rivals the main Slytherin common room itself, I looked around in amazement. A beautiful phoenix sat on a perch in one corner, and an equally beautiful and gentle 60-foot basilisk was stretched across the large area. The ceiling was see-through, and I could look up into the main Slytherin common room, a place myself, and I called home for 7 years. Harry Potter seated himself in a dark green wing-back chair with gold trim, and his pet snake Dora, a blackadder, was perched on the back. He gave me a charming smile, and I began asking our young hero about his life prior to Hogwarts. It wasn't a bed of roses, Mr. Potter said, sorrowfully shaking his head. He went on to tell me horrible tales of the muzz he was forced to live with after that infamous night in Godric's Hollow. His malignant uncle treated him worse than a house elf, and starved, beat, tormented, and mocked him throughout his young life. All because they hated magic. Something that Albus Dumbledore knew before he placed the infant Harry with the magic-hating moles. I don't hate my aunt and uncle though. I dislike them, but I don't hate them. You can't judge all moles to be horrible because of a few bad ones. It's like accusing all witches and wizards of being just like, you-know-who. They aren't all bad, and neither are we, Mr. Potter said. As Mr. Potter continued to tell me of his pre-Hogwarts years, my horror grew worse and worse. How can someone like Albus Dumbledore knowingly place a child in that kind of abusive environment? He is the headmaster of our greatest educational system in the magical British world. He should know better. Was there something more to the sinister agenda of Headmaster Dumbledore? I needed to know, so I asked Mr. Potter about his first 3 years of Hogwarts under Albus Dumbledore's rule. Young Harry went on to tell me tales of rampaging trolls, a professor that fell from the astronomy tower to his death, dangerous animals that were locked up in the school, possessed diaries belonging to you-know-who, an escaped convict, who turned out to be innocent, and dementors, which admittedly were not the headmaster's fault. But what of Mr. Potter himself? He, Professor Dumbledore, tries to control me, and we don't get along because I see things differently than he does. I don't see magic as light and dark. I judge the intention behind it. If I cut up a piece of fabric with a severing charm, that's okay, but if I use the severing charm to cut someone's arm off, it's not. Wise words from a mere 14-year-old. Mr. Potter went on to explain the past actions of the headmaster to me. My first year was sort of all right, but at the end he told me I had to go back to my mole aunt and uncle's house. A place he knowingly knew was bad for me. He had a professor meet me on the platform, and escort me through the barrier and into the hands of my so-called family. When I got home, they had installed a cat flap in the bedroom door so that they could throw scraps of food at me. There were many locks on the door, so that they could keep abnormal freaks like me away from respectable people, and they had placed bars on my window so that I couldn't escape. Mr. Potter took a deep breath during this painful memory, and petted the head of his beloved snake Dora to calm himself. I wanted to curse them, but I didn't. I did use some magic in order to get away from there, but I felt my life was in danger and that I had no other choice. I hope I don't get in trouble by saying that. I know I am not supposed to do underage magic during the summer. He had said with a small apologetic smile. Myself, and I don't blame him a bit. When I returned to school on September 1st, I was immediately called into Professor Dumbledore's office. He wanted to know why I hadn't stayed at my aunt and uncle's during the summer, so I explained it to him, and he got mad at me for not doing what he wanted me to do. Come to find out, the headmaster had placed a tracking charm on young Mr. Potter in order to control him further. But thankfully for our hero, Mr. Potter was discovered wandering around that summer by Nicholas Flamel, aged 630, the famous alchemist and known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. "Oh, the Flamels have been wonderful," Mr. Potter exclaimed when I asked about them. "I lived with them after I escaped from my aunt and uncle, and Mrs. Flamel told me all about my family heritage, what it means to live in our world, and all kinds of things. They have been really great to me, and have helped Sirius and I out so much." I went on to ask Mr. Potter about his godfather, Sirius Black, and if he was nervous about living with him. "No, I'm not. Sirius is really great. He is able to tell me stories about my parents that no one else could have told me. Living with him is really fun and we do a lot of great things. Great things that Albus Dumbledore apparently doesn't want Mr. Potter to experience." At the end of my second year, which had been full of confrontations with the headmaster, he tried to obliviate me. He wanted to send me back to my aunt and uncle's, though I don't know why. It's still unbelievable that he would want to send me back there. This shocked me to my very magical core, my good readers. Albus Dumbledore tried to obliviate a 12-year-old. It makes me wonder how many of your children he has obliviated. I know most people won't believe I was able to do this, but I'll swear an oath to prove it's true. I disarmed him, stunned him, and snapped his wand in half in order to protect myself. And it seems, my rabid readers, that ever since that moment, Albus Dumbledore has sought to smear our young hero's name. He calls me a dark and dangerous wizard. He thinks I'm arrogant and a show-off, and that I'm some kind of Dark Lord in training who is out to kill everyone, but I'm really not. All of this is because Mr. Potter disagrees with how Albus Dumbledore has tried to control him his entire life. I know some people believe him. They look at me and see an evil parcel-mouthed Slytherin, but ask any of my Gryffindor friends, 2 of whom are Mulborns, and you'll see the truth. I'm just a boy who is trying to be the best wizard I can be, and enjoy my school years so that I can hopefully pass on all that has been taught to me. I want to become a professor one day. A respectable position in our world, I may add. I admire young Mr. Potter's ambition to become a professor at our great Hogwarts. However, Mr. Potter knows it's not one-sided. He admits to handling some things wrong regarding the headmaster. I know there are some situations I could have handled differently, and I know I'm not totally innocent in my actions towards the headmaster, but I'm only 14 and doing the best I can. I asked Mr. Potter about the more peculiar things the headmaster dismisses when it comes to our young hero. Like the fact that he is the heir of Gryffindor, and why the phoenix, which belongs to a friend, would hang around Mr. Potter if he was a dark evil wizard like the headmaster claims. These are things that are common sense to us, but it seems like Albus Dumbledore turns a blind eye to them. He sees what he wants to see, and no one can tell him any different. Mr. Potter explained. Anyone who disagrees with him is labeled dark, dangerous, wrong, and sometimes worse things. When I asked him specifically about being the heir of Gryffindor, Mr. Potter laughed and had this to say. It's a running joke among my friends, and ever since I learned that I'm the heir of Godric Gryffindor, my friends call me Salazar Slytherin because I'm in Slytherin and I talk to snakes. I find it rather funny though. Most people forget that Gryffindor and Slytherin were best friends. My best friend Gordy is also a Slytherin, but I call him Godric sometimes because he acts like a Gryffindor, but our Gryffindor friends find it all funny. We are a weird group of mates. He laughed. But aside from titles, and who I'm related to, I'm just a child and I'm not perfect. I do get advice from professors and other adults that I trust, but I absolutely refuse to bow down and worship the ground the headmaster walks on. And apparently that doesn't set well with Albus Dumbledore. Has the headmaster gone senile in his old age? Is it time for him to hang up some of his titles and retire before he can do more damage? It seems that way. Mr. Potter told me of his agenda, an agenda that would have most people cheering him on. My agenda is to kill every person who bears the dark mark, and the half-blooded son of a mole who invented it. Anyone who is anyone knows that, you know who, is still out there. Whatever happened that night in Godric's Hollow remains a mystery, but, you know whose body was never found. I don't think I killed him then, but I will kill him should he ever try to return again. What makes that statement so profound is that Albus Dumbledore aims to stop Mr. Potter from completing that agenda, and just in case anyone thinks Mr. Potter is lying, he has proof should the right parties come looking for it. But why does Albus Dumbledore aim to stop our young hero? Mr. Potter doesn't know, and quite frankly, nor do I. However, the question still remains. Has Dumbledore gone senile? Should he retire to a quiet spot in the middle of nowhere? Does Albus Dumbledore, an adult, have the right to control every aspect of a young boy's life? A boy that has no other relationship to him other than school-related? Should Mr. Potter, a 14-year-old child, be slandered and vilified for protecting himself from Albus Dumbledore? You be the judge. Until next time, my wonderful and delightful readers. Rita Skeeter. Lily and James burst out laughing after a grinning Sirius read the entire article out loud to them via the mirrors. It had been a week since the first task, and Rita's article had finally been published. "I think I like that woman," Lily said, as she laughed loudly. "I hope Dumbledore is squirming in his seat right now. I hope Molly Weasley sends him 10 howlers. I hope he gets mail from every parent that has a child at Hogwarts telling him what a horrible man he is. I hope." "Lily," James shouted through tears of laughter. "Breath, sweetheart." "Well, I'm not done." She giggled. "Okay, I am, but you know what I'm talking about. That man has the gall to try and control my son. I still cannot wait for the day I get to punch him in his self-righteous crooked nose." Sirius snorted. "Salazar has been handling himself well. I think Harry's name is still pretty much intact." "He is doing a good job," James agreed with a nod. "The Potter name is still going to be respected, but if it's not, I don't blame him. I blame Albus." "I agree. I don't blame Salazar. The man has done the best he can," Lily said with a sigh. "He has defended Harry's name even though it's not Salazar's name to defend. I think I respect him even more now. Besides, when the final truth comes out, when Voldemort is finally gone for good, Albus is going to have a massive amount of egg all over his face." Yes, he will. Sirius agreed. Well, aside from Albus's name now getting thoroughly trashed in the paper, I have something exciting to share. My house is finally finished, he said with excitement. He vanished the black wall he had placed behind him, and he grinned as he held his arms wide open. His little cottage was one big open area that had no indoor walls, due to them making Sirius feel like he was back in prison. The roof was held in place by a combination of magic and a large double-sided fireplace that warmed the entire cottage. The fireplace also somewhat shielded the open bedroom from visitors, but hid the bathroom completely from view. The cottage was decorated sparsely, but it had a kitchen, a small area for bookshelves that could be considered a library, if you squinted just right, and a sitting area in the middle of the room. The walls were painted with red and gold stripes that could make a person go cross-eyed if they stared at them for too long. He had built it on a few of the back acres on Merlin's large property because he had come to love the area. Merlin was happy to sell him a few acres to let him build a house of his own. It was a peaceful, secluded place, and just what Sirius wanted. He was his own man now, and that suited him just fine. So Padfoot is Irish now? James asked with a teasing grin. I know there is a four-leaf clover joke in there somewhere. Sirius burst out laughing. Yeah, you can hang some clovers from your antlers to honor meat prongs. Not in this lifetime, James shouted, causing Sirius to grin at him. It's really great here and I love it, Sirius said with a laugh. Merlin lets Moony run wild on the full moon, and I run with him. Even though he's at Hogwarts, he still comes here for the change. It's just like old times prongs, only less danger cause there is no one around. Hey! He suddenly exclaimed, snapping his fingers. Maybe you can come next full moon. Bring Lily, and all of us can run together. It would be a good way to show off my animagus form. Lily said with a grin. We better run that by Salazar though, and Merlin too of course. That's true, but I don't see why Salazar would object. My place is still protected by Merlin's wards, Sirius said, but then he started to bounce around with a boyish grin on his face. I can't believe it though. My very own house, and I even have my very own house elf. Her name is Winky. Her former masters were the Crouches, he said, rolling his eyes. Her bond to the Crouches was officially and safely broken when they went to Azkaban, but she bonded with me and seems to be doing fine. She is fiercely loyal to me, which is something I have never experienced from a house elf before. You spent too much time around Kreacher, James said, scowling at the thought of the Black's demented house elf. I supposed so. Sirius nodded, but he started running around and pointing out different things he had done to the place. Lily just looked at her husband's best friend as tears began to form in her eyes. Seeing him so happy and full of life after the horrors he had been subjected to was worth all the years of putting up with his pranks and slight insanity. Lily grinned playfully at Sirius. Padfoot, I don't want to put a damper on your jovial mood, but I have to say, you finally grew up. Sirius stared at her in mock horror as James burst out laughing. Prongs. Situation critical. I need help. Quick, who can I prank? Sirius asked as he looked around wildly. Albus. Lily shouted at the same time. James said, Salazar. Sirius stopped and thought about it. Albus would be my first choice, but I have to go with Salazar. I sense that Godric is slacking on the pranks, and the twins are too. I'll think of something devious. But harmless. Lily warned. He has enough going on with the tournament. You are right, as always, Sirius said with a sigh, but then he grinned. I know just the thing to get our favorite Slytherin grinning again. With a bit of a groan, Lily rolled her eyes and hoped Salazar wouldn't end up killing the man. While Sirius and James began planning an epic prank on Salazar, Nicholas, Perenelle, and Merlin were sitting at Merlin's breakfast table reading the same Rita Skeeter article. He charmed her, Perenelle said with a grin. The cunning little devil. Nicholas chuckled. I wonder what Albus is thinking right now? Probably on ways of getting back at Salazar. I'm sorry to say though, it won't work. Perenelle replied with a haughty nod. Are you sure? Merlin asked, looking at them with raised eyebrows. I'm afraid this is only the beginning. We are going to see it get nasty before it gets any better. Albus is not going to take this lying down. You have seen something? Perenelle asked with wide, concerned eyes. I have seen many things, Merlin said with a sigh as he gazed out the window. But as I told Godric nearly 2 years ago, to speak of details will cause more harm than good. Will Albus get what's coming to him? Nicholas asked, hoping the wise, ancient wizard would give him a straight answer. This goes far beyond Albus and Salazar's posturing, Merlin said, shaking his head. I'm afraid many are going to suffer before it's all over. What can we do, Merlin? Nicholas asked in a voice just above a whisper. For now, nothing, Merlin replied. 2 wars are coming, and they are coming fast. One will be fought with words, posturing, and bravado, but the other war will bring darkness, death, and despair. Voldemort. Perenelle gasped. Merlin nodded sadly. Yes, he whispered. Change is coming to our world, but we must let it come. We must endure hardships, death, and horrors if we are to see a bright future. It will be painful, but we must fight. Even you? Nicholas asked, raising an eyebrow at his old friend. Even me, Merlin said, as his eyes grew hard as steel. The time is coming for me to make my presence known. For I, in good conscience, cannot sit the coming war out. It will take all of us to bring the madman down. All of us. Perenelle whispered in horror. All of us, Merlin confirmed, as he laid the Daily Prophet down on the table. The 2 pictures that accompanied the article stared back at them. One of Albus, who was standing tall and proud as he stared into the camera, and one of Harry Potter sitting in a winged back chair, smiling innocently with Nora stretched out across his shoulders. Merlin sighed as repeated his confirmation. All of us. I am not a pet. And that frilly woman spelled my name wrong. Nora exclaimed, as she hissed angrily and flicked the paper with the end of her tail. We should use this article to line Pigeon and the peacock's perches. Godric chuckled as he patted her head. It's all right, Dora, she spelled my name wrong too. If you call me by that awful name again, I will bite you, she hissed, as she haughtily slithered over to Blaise, who was trying to hold back a snort. Gordon Ruffin? Where in the world did she come up with that name? Salazar asked with a crooked grin plastered on his face, as he reread the article for the 3rd time in a row. They were at breakfast, and already the front-page article was causing a stir among staff and students alike. Many of them were glaring at the headmaster, who had a pained and constipated look on his face as he shifted around uncomfortably in his chair, but a great many more were glowering over at Salazar, as if daring him to continue his assault against the great and wonderful Albus Dumbledore. Salazar didn't care though, because he grinned at an owl flying fast and hard towards the headmaster. In its beak was a red envelope, no doubt containing a howler that must have come straight from someone in Hogsmeade, seeing as it got to the headmaster so fast. Albus Dumbledore. It roared in an unknown witch's voice, after Albus visibly cringed and opened it. You leave that sweet little boy alone. How dare you try and control him? I have half a mind to never sell you another lemon drop as long as I live. That must be Mrs. Flume, Blaise whispered loudly, as the howler stopped to catch a breath. She and her husband own honeydukes. If I ever hear of you trying to put him through more hell, you will wish for death. I can think up many poisons that I can slip into your precious candy that will kill you slowly. You have been warned. And with that, the howler began ripping itself to shreds. Over at the Gryffindor table, the twins were howling with laughter, and even Ron looked highly amused over what just happened. Neville and Hermione were trying to hide large grins, but they were failing miserably. Up at the head table, Minerva and Poppy had smug, wicked grins on their faces. Severus looked bored, but Salazar knew him well enough to know that his eyes were shining with laughter held back by sheer, strong willpower. Sprout and Flitwick were grinning, while Remus cast a silencing charm on himself so he could laugh loudly, but still hide the fact he was laughing. However, the other professors were shooting sympathetic looks Albus's way, and Karkaroff and Madame Maxime looked torn on how to react. Karkaroff finally settled on smirking, while Madame Maxime preferred to remain indifferent. Surprisingly, another owl came swooping in and deposited another red envelope in front of the headmaster. Albus sighed and quickly broke the seal in an effort to get it over with. "Albus," it bellowed in a clear, strong manly voice. "I told you that one day your selfish, supposed, all-knowing, slimy, ways would come back and bite you in the ass. I suggest you apologize to that young man while your head is still attached to your shoulders. You are not the second coming of Merlin, and you don't know it all, I assure you. And don't even think about coming down here to try and talk some reason and sense into me, because I know things you don't. May Godric Gryffindor have mercy on your soul." "Who the bloody hell was that?" Blaise asked, staring wide-eyed at the howler that was ripping itself apart. "That, my young friend, was Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's younger brother," Godric whispered with a wicked grin, as he sipped his pumpkin juice. "I'd know that voice anywhere. He owns the Hog's Head pub in Hogsmeade. I go there all the time to grab a couple shots of fire whiskey. Dodgy place, but Aberforth is a good man, and a good friend. You need to meet him, Salazar. He knows who I am." Salazar looked at his friend in shock. "Really?" he asked, and Godric nodded. "Why did you never tell me?" "Slipped my mind really, with all the things we've had to put up with. He doesn't know who you are, but he does know about me. Which explains the mercy part of his howler. No doubt Aberforth thinks I'm headed up here right now to claim my heir and behead Albus for trying to slander you." Godric chuckled. Salazar laughed. "I'll be happy to meet him on our next Hogsmeade trip, but as Salazar, not Harry. I trust you to know if he's trustworthy, but I don't want him to know the big secret," Salazar said, looking at Albus, who was pale-faced and still staring at the pieces of the howler from his brother. "Fair enough, but Aberforth has a point. Albus isn't the second coming of Merlin." Godric chuckled. "Yeah, because the first coming of Merlin hasn't moved on yet," Blaise whispered with a knowing grin. "Nor will he ever." Salazar chuckled, as another owl swooped in with a howler. It was from Madame Rosmeter, who ran the Three Broomsticks, and she threatened to poison Albus's personal stock of butterbeer that he bought from her every month. After that, Albus shooed everyone out of the Great Hall and sent them to their first period classes. For the rest of the day everyone could hear snippets of all the howlers that arrived at all different times throughout the day, but they weren't all for the headmaster. Salazar received some as well, and he got a good laugh out of some of them as they bellowed things like "You are just a child, respect your elders," or "Professor Dumbledore is a good man," and his personal favorite, "How dare you question the great Albus Dumbledore." However, he destroyed the nastier ones that shouted awful things and went into details about how they wanted to kill him and spill his evil, nasty, worthless guts on the ground. These were things no child should be subjected to hearing, and he frowned at the ashy remains of the howlers from those sick and twisted people who considered themselves light. "Wormtail! Get over here now!" Voldemort suddenly snapped, startling the man and causing him to spill a nearby goblet of water. He was seated in his large chair in the dining room of the drafty and cold Riddle Manor. The fire was dying in the fireplace, causing the temperature in the room to plunge even further. Voldemort smirked, which was actually somewhat terrifying on his small gruesome face, as Peter quickly mopped up the water before turning to face his master. Voldemort stared at him, and thought about telling Nagini to chase the little rat for making him wait so long, but he decided against it. "Read me the article again," he ordered, as he pointed a bony, twisted finger towards the paper. Peter nodded and began to once again read from Rita's article, and as Voldemort closed his eyes and listened to the words, he smiled to himself. This is good news, Wormtail. Potter and Dumbledore are divided and weak. When I return to full strength it will be easy to rid the world of them, he said in a raspy, almost gleeful tone. But what of Potter's agenda, my lord? Peter asked nervously. Voldemort waved his hand around dismissively. What of it? He is just a child spouting off at the mouth. He can say whatever he wants right now, but let's see if he still wants to stick to his agenda when he is face to face with my wand. So you still aim to kill him? Peter asked, flinching slightly as Voldemort flicked his wand at the fireplace in order to rekindle the flames. No, not kill him. I have changed my mind about killing him. I want to break him. Voldemort rasped loudly as he banged his fist on the arm of his moth-eaten chair. The boy still dares to curse my lineage, but he can be taught to hold a civil tongue in his head. It's clear that he doesn't care for me, and I suppose I should have known that. However, the boy is powerful, as I have already said, and he is smart and very cunning. Just look at him, Voldemort said, motioning to the picture of Harry Potter smiling innocently, and sitting in the winged back chair with Nora stretched across his shoulders, but then he continued. The picture of innocence. Voldemort chuckled. The boy is about as innocent as me. I can see it in his eyes and his posture. He may be able to fool his friends, family, and supporters, but he can be swayed, he said with a malicious grin. Little Nora has grown up too, I see. I actually liked her and found her amusing during Potter's first year. She will no doubt prove to be an excellent companion for the boy when he joins us. Isn't that right, my lovely Nagini? If you say so, master, but can I eat the other snake? No, that would only alienate the boy, and cause him to hate us. You must embrace them both. If that is your wish, master, she said with a slight bow of her head. Oh, how I could stick it to Dumbledore if the boy joined me. Voldemort laughed. He would be responsible for sending the boy right to me because of his stupidity. The heir of Slytherin and the heir of Gryffindor team. Ha! Take that, you foolish old goat, he shouted gleefully, as he picked up a nearby dinner knife and began rapidly stabbing Albus's picture with it. A lovely, gleeful day it will be. Peter cringed at the parcel-tongue. Personally he thought his master was slightly loopy, but he dared not to say that out loud. Peter seriously doubted that Harry would ever join his master willingly or not, but he didn't voice that opinion, because if he did, he knew he would find himself cursed. So as the deranged madman continued to laugh maniacally and babble to his damned snake, Peter quietly snuck out of the dining room and headed up to Voldemort's bedchamber, so he could get it ready for when his master decided to retire for the evening. To say that Albus was having a bad day was an understatement, and as he sat in his office, he continued to stare at the article and shake his head. His desk was littered with the ashes and ripped up remains from the many howlers that had been coming in at a steady pace all day. Fawkes had left earlier that morning in order to get away from the noise, and his office held an unusual silence since the normally sleeping and snoring portraits of past headmasters had moved off elsewhere. I didn't realize it was going to be this bad, Alastair, he said, and Moody scoffed loudly as he stood with his back to the wall. It's Rita Skeeter. What did you expect? The boy has the public eating out of his hands, Albus replied, motioning to the ashy remains of the howlers he had yet to vanish. Thankfully, some of my more staunch supporters believe this is nonsense. Cornelius Flew called me earlier to assure me that I have his full support. Cornelius believes, just as I do, that the boy is evil. Several in the Wizengamot and other ministry officials agree with me, and say I need to watch Harry closely. Potter is odd, Albus, I don't deny that, but I don't think he is the second coming of Voldemort, Moody said. He is a Slytherin, Albus said, looking at Moody sharply. So is Malfoy and his little gang. Moody snapped. Albus waved him off. Harry is different. Alastor, you don't understand. Harry is the mirror image of Tom Riddle when he was at school. He is unbalanced, evil, cunning, powerful, and he uses people to his advantage. Case in point, Mrs. Skeeter. He said, motioning to the article. I know Harry manipulated her in order to get her on his side. Pot calling the kettle black, Albus? Moody said with an amused grin. This is different. Albus shot back. I do it for the greater the good of all people. He stammered. Aha. Moody said, eyeing him closely. So what about the allegations, Albus? What of Ruffin's Phoenix? Why has the Phoenix not alerted Ruffin to Potter's evilness, and why is it still hanging around Potter? Nahum probably has, but Mr. Ruffin obviously refuses to listen to his Phoenix, and Nahum probably stays around Harry in order to protect Mr. Ruffin. I don't doubt Mr. Ruffin's lightness. He wouldn't have a Phoenix if he was anything other than extremely light, but I worry about that boy, as I do the Gryffindors. I'm afraid Harry will corrupt them and fill their head with dark and dangerous notions. Harry has tricked his friends into believing he is good, but in reality he is not. Tom Riddle did the same thing, and some of his friends turned out to be the first Death Eaters. So what you are saying is you think Potter's agenda is fake? Moody asked curiously. No, that I believe is true, but I think it goes deeper than that. Harry wants Voldemort out of the way so he can take Voldemort's place as the next Dark Lord. If you look closely, you will see that he has slowly gathered supporters. Supporters that he has taken away from me. All of the Weasleys, Minerva, Poppy, his friends, and his family. Namely Remus, Sirius, the Flamels, and that abhorrent Nilrem fellow, who by the way, I think is helping Harry to achieve his ultimate goal. He has taken a lot of my supporters, and he loves to rub my face in it. Albus said, growing angrier and angrier with each word. All of these people are walking into a trap, and he will kill them all. That is his plan. A skeptical Moody looked at Albus. Are you sure about that? Potter may hate you, and Merlin knows he loves to rub you the wrong way, but to everyone else he's perfectly honest. Case in point, I overheard some Hufflepuffs talking about Pomona taking points away from Potter for not paying attention in class. They were shocked because he didn't put them back like he always does when you take points from him. They said he nodded and accepted the point loss humbly. That's because he wants everyone to believe that he is a good little boy. Albus said as he glared at his friend. It's the same way Tom Riddle was. He'd humble himself in front of authority to make them believe he was a good child. Harry knows that I am onto him, so he lashes out at me because he knows I'm not fooled. I don't know, Albus. Moody said, shaking his head. Something is just not adding up here. There is more to this than what is right in front of us. You must tread carefully. There is nothing more here, Alastor. I know I am right about this. Harry Potter is an evil little boy, and he mustn't be allowed to continue to behave like this. So what are you going to do? Expel him? No, because believe it or not, he do still need him to defeat Voldemort because of the prophecy. However, the mindless killing of everyone bearing the dark mark is senseless, and cannot be allowed. That is what I take issue with as far as his agenda goes. Albus said with a sigh, but then he looked at Alastor. As for what I am going to do, I'm going to strike back. I'm going to tell the world just what I think about Harry Potter. I'm going to warn the world, and I'm going to clearly point out the similarities between Voldemort and Harry Potter. He's 14 now, Albus. Moody exclaimed. You can't crucify the boy in the public square. Better they have their eyes opened now before it's too late. Albus said with a steely resolve blazing in his eyes. Moody just stared at his friend in stunned disbelief, and only one thing entered his mind. Potter had somehow known this was going to happen, and Albus was walking into some kind of trap.